Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this first day of the World Economic Forum. And we are thrilled to be here and have what I imagine is going to be a fascinating conversation. If Mark wants to sit down, he can. This is a conversation that I think is probably perhaps the most pivotal and important discussion that's taking place right now, really in industry anywhere, which is the issue of trust, and in particular, the issue of trust in the world of technology. We have so many hopes and dreams and aspirations that relate to technology and all the things that technology is supposed to help us with. And yet, we're at a moment where I think some of our deepest fears, our deepest concerns about that trust have risen to a level that have changed that discussion. And we have a group of people here who are poised to answer this question and help us try to understand how to think about these particular issues at this moment. We want to make this conversation as interactive as possible, and I promise you we will go to you early in the room, so please think of your questions. I also want this conversation to be a broad one. You know, when you think about technology, and in particular you think about trust, it can go into many different places. It can be about privacy. It can be about control, your own sense of control or lack of control. It could be about news and fake news. It can be about employment and jobs. So this conversation, I imagine, will be a very freewheeling one. Here is who is with us today. And I'm going to introduce someone who you may not know first, who's Rachel Botsman, who's in the middle here. Rachel is our global guru on the new era of technology and trust. And she's the author of a book called Who You Can Trust. She also co-authored a book called What's Mine Is Yours. It was the first book to define the terms sharing economy and collaborative consumption, which Time named one of the 10 ideas that will change the world. Dara Khosrowshahi, I've known Dara forever, and I just, that happens every time.
He's working on it.
He just took what is clearly one of the toughest jobs in tech as the new CEO of Uber. He knows a little something about the issue of trust, or at least has dived into that pool in recent months, guiding what is now the most valuable startup and private company through some very serious public trust issues. I should just tell you as a way of background, he's an Iranian immigrant, left the country at 9 years old on the eve of the Iranian Revolution in 1978, grew up in New York, and then went off to work for Barry Diller, and has had a remarkable and storied career. Ruth Porat is here, former Morgan Stanley. A few years ago, Politico named her the most powerful woman on Wall Street, but she today is at the helm as the CFO of Alphabet, better known to most of us as Google. She earned the same distinction now in the tech world, leading Google through what has been a remarkable restructuring and transformation, and the stock under her reign has now swelled 30% at least, if not more. You can smile about that. We have another bomb thrower in the room. Samardan Sorrell is here. The Economist named him the king of the madmen, and he is that. He founded, of course, the world's largest advertising and marketing agency.
What about the
WPP.
mad women?
Excuse me? Yes.
Okay, fine.
Hashtag me too.
Okay.
And Mark Benioff is here at the end, Salesforce CEO and founder. I should tell you, in high school, Mark sold his first app. It was software called How to Juggle for the TRS 80 Model 1, for those of you who were around then, to a computer magazine for $75. Flash forward 30 years, Salesforce is now slated to bring in more than $10 billion in revenue for this current fiscal year. So thank you all for being here. Here's how I want to begin the conversation. And Dara, I'm going to start with you. You have now lived trial by fire in this new job. And all of us think about trust, and we all get in the backs of Ubers based on a star system. And something very strange happened to me, or at least that I've thought about over the past decade or two, which is that all of a sudden we have trusted, or we have, I don't know if it's real trust or the illusion of trust. The idea that other people have told us that we should trust this driver because they have this rating or I have this rating. And so given everything that you've experienced over the last several months, given the regulatory environment, Honestly, why should people, I just want to start the conversation at a very base level. Why should people get in the back of an Uber car?
So people should get in the back of an Uber car first because you can click a button and it'll get to you in 3 minutes and it will be cheap. We are doubling down on making sure that the machinery of background checks and making sure that licenses are good, inspecting the vehicles, et cetera, that all that needs to happen in order for someone to be a licensed driver of a black car or a taxi, et cetera, happens at scale. Okay, so that we take care of. And then the second is that the power of the community and these drivers who are driving, most of the drivers on our system have had more than 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 trips. And the ratings are real. We don't mess around with the ratings one way or the other. So when you get a 4.8 or 4.9 rated driver, you know that that driver has passed an array of background checks, et cetera. You know that that driver has a history. And by the way, I think that is much more information than you have when you hail a cab on a corner in New York City. Now, we plan to do much more with driver ratings. And I think right now for us, driver ratings is a piece of information that you can have. And what we're hoping to take the system into next is to truly stand for safety and to be able to have the drivers who are particularly good, who particularly provide a terrific service, be at a different level from, let's say, the average driver, and also allow the user to be able to opt in into a higher level of service. Because right now, the only higher level of service that we define is a nicer car. And I think the car and service are two different things. So we have to bring much more fidelity into our system, and we're very, very early on that path.
Rachel, do you buy it? You have a chapter in your book called Who Can You Trust? And Dara, I apologize about this, but she uses an example about an Uber driver named Jason Brian Dalton who killed 6 people and seriously injured 2 others. Take this on.
It's not the best chapter for Uber. It was the Kalamazoo killings. And the reason why I tell the story isn't actually to bash Uber, it's to highlight something really interesting that technology is doing to trust, is that in many instances, it accelerates trust. We're living in this age of kind of trust on speed. So every time we swipe right on Tinder or we accept the driver, in many ways, convenience is trumping trust. And I find this really interesting because trust actually needs a little bit of friction. It needs us to slow down and to say, is this person or this piece of technology or this piece of content, is it actually worthy of our trust? And the challenge that we have is that technology wants to automate the process. It wants to make it more and more efficient because, we see people that their car hasn't arrived in 3 minutes, or they can't get a date by lunchtime, or their air task or their TaskRabbit hasn't arrived by 8 p.m., or they can't get into their Airbnb. So on the one hand, as consumers, we want that convenience and we want that speed. But at the same time, the companies have this responsibility to actually build the security and the safety and the trust into technology, which actually means introducing a little bit of friction to slow down. So the thing that's so interesting about and very tragic about the Kalamazoo story is that it happened over a 6-hour period. And some of the passengers that actually got in the car said, "Are you not Jason Dalton, the serial killer?" And when you read the police report, it's because they never thought that the app would send them a serial killer. And so I find this really interesting that we're living in this age as to who is accountable. In that situation, is it the individual that has responsibility, or is it the platform's responsibility to reduce the risk of bad things happening and then to be there when things go wrong? So I think that's a lot of the tension that we're facing with the technology, is that we want the empowerment and we want the agency, but at the same time, we want the platforms to take a lot of responsibility in reducing the risk and being responsible when things go wrong. And I don't think we can have both.
Dara, what do you think?
I think that when you're in a circumstance where you're giving over 4 billion rides a year, you start reverting to the mean. And the fact is that in real life, there's some really, really bad people out there. Right. And I do think that over a long period of time, one is we do have to be careful in representing a rating for what it is. It's a rating of how you drove. It's not a rating of whether you're a serial killer or not. And so we've got to be plain spoken about what we can do and what we can't do. That said, over a period of time, we can have data scientists create a platform that is safer. And for example, we have a big service in Mexico City, and during certain times of the day, when requests come out, let's say it's actually of the night, when requests come out of areas of Mexico City that are less than safe, we block those requests because we want to keep our drivers safe. And that's based on data that shows that there's a certain kind of individual who is clicking on a car and then canceling a car, clicking again, canceling again, and then when they like the car, they click on the car to bring it over and they try to steal the car. We prevent that kind of occurrence from happening. Hurts our volume, but it creates a safer environment, in this case, for our drivers. We need the data to get the system to adjust and learn, but when you have random events like this, with 4 billion rides a year, I don't know if data can make up for that. And so we have to make sure that consumers know that we're doing our best, but a 4.9 rating is based on how someone drives, not the state of their mind.
So I think it's really interesting because I think what's happened is, in the first sort of 6 years of platforms, whether it be Facebook or whether it be Uber, it kind of like the platforms are allowed to create a lot of value in just matching supply and demand. And I think what's now happening with regulation and the media is they're saying you can't extract all the value in just matching supply and demand and not be responsible for what happens on the platform. You can't have it both ways.
And that's where I want to go with Ruth, which is this. How should we think about platforms? Because one of the most successful, and when I say successful in terms of economic success, has been these new platforms that have been created. But at the same time, there has been a sense that the platform unto itself is not responsible necessarily for everything that happens on the platform. We're just setting the stage. People are buying the opportunity to be on the stage, but what happens on the stage is not our doing. Mm-hmm. And we've heard this sort of commentary from some of the social media companies and tech writ large. Am I wrong about that, and how do we change that?
So at our essence, we are about creating platforms, and our view very strongly is that platforms open up the world to people in ways that have not otherwise been possible. So if you go back to your opening question about trust, trust for us is about creating quality product and having a reputation that you earn every day, and those are obviously intertwined. And when you go back to the mission that Larry and Sergey articulated at inception, which is to organize the world's information, make it universally accessible and useful, their view is if you did that with quality and security, impartial information, good things would follow. You would create opportunities for many people. You would open doors that didn't exist. And in fact, sitting here today, 7 of our products have over 1 billion users each. And the platforms, to your point, open doors, make it possible for developers anywhere around the world to have the access to the same markets that everyone has through the Play Store, or for students anywhere around the world to have the same information. They wouldn't come back to these platforms if they didn't believe the quality and the security justified the presence. So the trillions of searches that we have every day, to us, are a really poignant point that people are entrusting that we're going to give them the experience that they want and open doors that they want. And when we look at the reputation side of it, our view is that we have a duty to our users, our advertisers, publishers, the communities in which we operate. And if we're not investing to protect that, whether it's through the human search, the human trusted reviewers that we have, the machine learning that we're using because of the pace of change, as Dara is saying, or through guardrails and policies, we're going to erode that trust. And the quality of the platform, the return to the platform, again, whether it's Android developers accessing the rest of the world, or what we're now doing with machine learning, open sourcing TensorFlow, so that everybody anywhere has the opportunity to use this great technology. This is opening doors and creating opportunities. And that's why we remain tech optimists, because our view is that through these platforms, we create opportunities that otherwise didn't exist.
Martin's itching to say something, I can tell.
You said about bomb throwing. So on the platforms, and the 2 big digital platforms, obviously Google and Facebook, and we've got Amazon coming, and maybe 2018 will be the year when Amazon starts to attack the 2 principals who control 75% of digital advertising, which is 30% of the world market. So between the two of them, they're controlling 20, 21, 22% of the world market, world advertising market. The issue, I think, and coming back to Ruth's observations, is whether Google and Facebook are media companies or technology companies. That's the fundamental issue. And if they acknowledge, which they have not to date, philosophically, acknowledge that they're media companies, but in practice they are starting to, because both Facebook and Google are now hiring people to monitor their editorial content, because the big issue is, can we trust all the content that is on these platforms? A few days ago, Mark Zuckerberg modified the Facebook policy in relation to the news feed, and we're going to have different gradations of news feed. We're going to have more primacy or more privileged positions given to news feeds we trust, or we can trust, according to some form of rating by consumers, and less primacy to those that we can't. So that's one set of things. So I think that's the key issue for the big platforms in digital advertising, to acknowledge the fact they are media owners. We distribute 5 billion out of our 75 billion of media portfolio to Google, and about 2 billion to Facebook, and Disney Fox would be about 3 billion. So those are the relative orders of magnitude, but they are all media owners. That's one thing. Second thing, coming back to the exchange between Rachel and Dara, I'm not sure that today is much different. Well, it is very different, but it is really different to history. Word of mouth advertising was the most effective medium in terms of recommending products and services to people. That's the thing we believe. And what we're seeing in technology is just a really adaptation of that, or improvement of that. Technologies are going to continue to improve, and the way that we receive word of mouth and recommendation is going to improve over time. Blockchain technology may be a further advance that enables us to eradicate some of the key issues. The key issue from the consumer point of view, just developing it further, are two issues. One is privacy, and the second thing is employment. Are these revolutions in technology are going to improve my position as a consumer from a privacy point of view? Are they going to improve my position from an employment point of view? And the populist revival that we've seen over the last few years on both sides of the Atlantic are just examples of people becoming more and more concerned about the employment issue.
Mark, you have been one of the few people in the tech world who have openly spoke about the need for regulation in tech land. When you say that this industry needs to be regulated, what do you mean by that? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, let me just finish up with, I think, this illustrative example, which is Uber, because I think it is probably very important to talk about. And Dara was not here a year ago as the CEO of Uber. Everybody knows that. There was another CEO, and then we all watched and witnessed what happened. Especially starting with this incredible article that Susan Fowler wrote, which I think that was her name, right? Yeah. So the Uber employee said, hold on, there's some problems in the culture. And let me just outline what these issues are inside Uber. And that began something really amazing, right? Which is a crisis of trust. And it became a crisis of trust because she said there was no trust in the culture. She said that it was a culture only built for speed, that it was growth at any cost, and that the CEO was setting that tone from the top. And then as that frame got set by her and amplified by many people in Silicon Valley who experienced that, then more evidence kind of started to build around the culture and what was going on, even to the point where there was this phenomenon with the user community, which was this delete the Uber app. And that actually turned into a real thing. And it started to affect their revenue line. And then it got to the board level. And then the board said, okay, well, hold on. And it's not like the board didn't know what was going on. Okay, it was crystal clear what was happening in the company and with the CEO. And then finally, Mark, I'd argue, hold on just one sec. Sure the board okay, the board didn't know, sorry. And then basically,
they should have known.
The board was shocked. And then basically, we basically got to a point where kind of the whole super majority vote structure thing that's kind of going on in Silicon Valley of I'm the entrepreneur and I'm in charge no matter what happens, kind of gets blown up. And this idea that this is somehow acceptable, right? And it's not. And in the world of our connected products, for all the things I think that actually were just discussed, but in the world of these new connected products, in the fourth industrial revolution, in this multi-stakeholder dialogue that we have here at Davos, trust has to be your highest value in your company. And if it's not, something bad is going to happen to you.
You were saying it's a leadership issue. You're just basically saying
it's 100%. It's a culture issue. It's what value, what is the most important thing to you in your company? What is the most important thing to you in your company? Is it trust or is it growth? If growth, I think it was you that said the very powerful thing. You said convenience trumps trust, which doesn't have anything to do with our speaker on Friday. It was this thing. Ooh. But this idea, if anything trumps trust, we're in trouble. Okay? So that is really what's up, which is, what is the most important thing to you in your company? Really look at your value system. What's number one? Because, look, if everything is important, nothing is important, you have to choose what is really important to you. And in the example of the previous CEO, he had a different value at the peak of his hierarchy than Dara has today, I'm sure. Okay? So that's why every board, every CEO, every entrepreneur is here. We're in a new world, okay? We're in a new world. And you better be ready. I mean, we could go through all the different pieces of that, but trust better be number one.
You made a very important point, was you use the term quality growth. And I think I'll take that and translate it into a different term. Quality growth means having a long-term perspective. You can have short-term growth that's corrupted, but that's not durable for the long term. And I completely agree with you that it's about culture. And that culture has to be about respecting the user, respecting the opportunity, and looking for the long term. Because if you're focused on the long term, you're focused on durable growth and durable success, then you'll avoid some of these issues that you've talked about. I think there's one thing that we do at Alphabet, at Google, that I would encourage every company in every industry to do. And it's our all-company meeting where everyone is encouraged to ask any question, and they do. And we have a company voting board, and you can vote on questions, and whatever is at the top of that leaderboard, we must answer. And relative to what I have seen in other places, it drives a level of transparency and openness in the company. It surfaces the types of problems which you don't want to get in a memo later published that's festered for too long. And it really gets us to grasp quickly, what do we need to do? What's at the core of our culture so that we really are protecting what we're doing for the long term?
But two things, Andrew, just think. Firstly, Mark mentioned dual voting structures or geared voting structures.
And I guess implicitly you said maybe that's a problem and maybe that should be changed.
That's one thing.
We had super voting shares, which we blew up essentially.
Yeah, that's one thing as to whether that. My own view is that enables entrepreneurs to take the long view and therefore is an advantage rather than a disadvantage. But obviously there are cases where it doesn't work. That's one thing. The second thing is we now have 7 companies, which I call the 7 sisters, and there are parallels to Standard Oil and the oil companies. John D. Rockefeller. You could argue that Jeff Bezos is the 21st century John D. Rockefeller. You have 7 companies which have $500 billion or more of market cap, 2 Chinese, Alibaba and Tencent, and the big 5, the fearsome 5, which in terms of market value and brand value, the annual brand values that we do, are at the pinnacle. They are the top 5 positions. The question is whether they are getting into a position where they should be regulated or not. We have in Europe GDPR that has affected the way that data companies and the platforms operate in Europe. We have some decisions from the EU. I think Google faced 3 decisions from the DG, one of which has come down. There are 2 more to come. So these regulatory issues for companies that are considerable size, that issue is going to become increasingly
Ruth,
important.
is it ever? Can you ever get too big? Could Google be too big? Is that real?
Well, that's one of the unanswerable questions. Let me come at it.
I assume you get asked that question regularly.
So let me talk about a bit about how our structural change. I think our structure change going from Google to Alphabet was really helpful to give us a structure that enables us to continue to invest in opportunities that hopefully will improve lives for billions. And what we did by setting up Google over here and the other bets as separate areas, the founders focused intensely on the other bets, is create this opportunity, one, for the kind of focus you need to answer your question. But the other point that we've made is that we don't have a monolithic approach to everything. We took an equity investment into our life sciences business, Verily. We want to make sure that we're doing the right thing, again, for our users, for the business, to really let these businesses grow and thrive. And so I think that structural change was a really important and valuable one.
So
I think just on size, whether a company gets too big or not, the question of effectiveness is one question. But as Google and many of the internet companies get larger and larger, I think the issue as it relates to trust is that there's an information asymmetry between the company and the user. And the company starts having so much data and information about the user that if you describe it as a fight, it's just not a fair fight. And I'll give you an innocent example of my old company, at Expedia. When you did a search at Expedia, when you said, I want to go from A for B, the search in the olden days might have taken 5 to 6 seconds long. And we used to show a picture of a beautiful desert island, et cetera, to get someone thinking about their next trip. A smart engineer thought, well, what if we test out those images? Let's try some other stuff. So the user didn't know they were being tested out on. And so an image that won was a person missing a train. That created a bit of apprehension. Oh my God, if I don't book this trip, I'm going to miss a train. That did better than the desert island. The next iteration was actually a user staring at his credit card who was angry. I don't know why the angry credit card guy worked, but the angry credit card guy did work. Kind of okay. Then an engineer comes up, and what you've got to realize is these are very, very young people who are taking action at low levels of the company, who are trying to drive results, and they're trying to grow. So a really smart engineer came up with an idea. He put up a picture of a cobra snake. So you have the snake staring at you, saying you better book this ticket. That worked beautifully, okay? Of course, we kind of came down and said, no way, you can't do this, and we can't kind of mess with people's emotions this way. So we came in and kind of pulled all that back. But that's a really small example of users essentially being experiments, trying to drive results for companies in a circumstance where users have no idea what's going on. So
are you making the argument to break these companies up then?
I'm not making the argument of breaking the companies up. I think it goes to core values, what Mark talked about, which is, one of our core norms is just do the right thing, period. For that to go deep, deep, deep in the organization, and one way or the other, whether it's through regulation or it's through news organizations, et cetera, talking about this stuff because there is an information asymmetry here. Unfortunately, many users are lazy, and somehow we have to find a balance.
Right. Isn't there a difference in terms of consumers' attitudes between mature markets and fast growth, or other people call developing markets? And what we see is there is more trust, actually, of government and data and government. India is a good example with social security, effectively numbers and identities. Whereas that sort of system in mature markets, because of distrust of government amongst electorates, is much more prevalent. So in a way, the newer countries, the newer growth countries, I think have been much more responsive both to government and to the private sector in terms of use of technology in the leapfrogging process that they've gone through.
I want to posit this, and I'm going to go to Mark on this, and I want to get back to the question of if you do want to regulate these industries, how you do it. But think about this. This is from Tom Goodwin, the Senior Vice President of Havas Media. He writes, Uber, world's largest taxi company, owns no vehicles. Facebook, the world's most popular media owner, creates no content. Alibaba, the most valuable retailer, has no inventory. And Airbnb, the world's largest accommodation provider, owns no real estate. Something interesting is happening. And the reason I raised that particular quote is because all of you have talked about culture inside your companies. But fascinatingly enough, especially when you think of a company like an Uber or an Airbnb, so much of the forward-facing consumer experience actually isn't with employees at all. So when you think about that culture, how do you get there? But I also want to get you on the regulation question too.
Well, I think on the regulation question, I mean, we have the former competition commissioner of the European Union, vice president of the European Union, Millie, sitting in the front row. So I'm sure she'd be happy to chime in on this. Number one is when you look at other industries. So let's look at the financial services industry, and let's say we're sitting here a decade ago, which we were in this room. We had a panel on financial services. I don't know if Martin was here. I was here. And they start talking about CDOs and credit default swaps and all these great new products that they've built and how they're accelerating the economy and making all this stuff work, okay? The regulators were not paying close enough attention to what some of those issues were that were happening in the innovation. I don't think that's also so unlike, what we see maybe, the cigarette industry for a long time. So, well, Nick, we have this great new product and you're gonna love it. And it's addictive and it's, not that great for you. And there's kind of these outside forces that are gonna shape your attitudes and how you're gonna use it. You know a lot about this with a lot of your clients as well. And also the food industry. The food industry, look at sugar, where we're going with sugar. We all know, we all can see the signs and where things are pointing. And, that is really the point of regulators and the point of government to kind of come in and point true north. And in the tech industry, we've been remarkably clear of those regulators for pretty much the whole industry, lifespan. But I think we're seeing signs. Maybe we're not completely there yet, but we're seeing signs, especially this year, especially when you see what happened with the elections, especially what you see with social networks, and especially when you see CEOs who fully abdicate their responsibilities and say, I had no idea that was happening. I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on. What?
Who are you talking about?
Well, there's so many of them, I can't call them out. So I just think that the signs are pointing to more regulation. Because when the CEOs won't take responsibility, okay, then I think you have no choice but for the government to come in and go, come on, what's going on? Some of this technology is so powerful and so sophisticated and so deep and so multidimensional that even these companies don't understand how it's being used, in nefarious ways. We all know that. And when the CEO gets up out on stage and says, there's no way that could happen. And then 2 weeks later, oh yeah, there's a little bit there. And then it's kind of this, another reveal and another reveal and another reveal. I'm like, I get enough of that in the government. I don't need that in our industry.
Do you think the regulators have moved fast enough? They haven't moved fast enough.
No, they have not. There needs to be a more aggressive movement.
And that's starting.
I agree. I think that this is going to start to happen. Because I think that as we move more aggressively into the fourth industrial revolution, and the technologies which today are all kind of very early become more sophisticated, and when AI becomes more dominant, and when these things start to impact jobs, okay, and that kind of thing, that's when I think you're going to start to get more government interaction.
Okay, so Mark, I'm making you king for the day, though. What are you doing? How are you doing it? Meaning you're the regulator. Uh-huh. What are you doing?
You act exactly as you do in every other industry. You have, trust and verify process and come in and make sure things are happening exactly as they say they're being happened. And I think that we have lots of good examples from other industries on how to make that happen.
Rachel, how would you do it?
Yeah, so I think the challenge for regulators, if you take this up a level and you look at what's happening, is that we're in this trust shift. So for a long time, trust existed in traditional institutions, and we're seeing how that's being eroded. And trust flowed in a very top-down, hierarchical fashion. There was a very linear relationship between the company and the consumer. And what's happening is that's being blown up in many ways, and we're seeing this distributed form of trust that now flows sideways directly to individuals, whether that's strangers, peers, colleagues, whatever it is. And this is a real challenge for regulators because a lot of regulation is designed for traditional institutions. It's designed to think in this top-down hierarchical way. So when you start looking and you talk to regulators and you're talking about how do you regulate a platform, how do you break up these network monopolies, the way regulators naturally think is, well, where is the center? Where is the center of accountability? And that's a real problem when you have millions, billions of users who are essentially the product. And so I think we're seeing this play out with Facebook this week when they said the users are now, they're the ones that rate the content, and there's been this backlash. But we have to ask ourselves what we want. Do we want Facebook to be the arbiter of truth? Do we want there to be a group of experts and regulators to decide what news is trustworthy, or do we want we, the users, to decide? So I think that's the challenge, is that regulation, a lot of regulation is still stuck in this institutional mindset, and it hasn't yet adapted fast enough to these distributed networks and systems.
Okay, so let me ask you this.
Just
Go ahead,
on one
please.
point on that, I think that there's no way that regulators are going to be able to keep up with the speed at which technology is changing. I think it's too much of an ask, and I think where the regulators can play a part is for accountability. I think that often the higher up you are in organizations, the less accountable you are, and my ask of regulators would be to be hard in their accountability so that a CEO knows that he or she's job is to know what's going on at the company, and if they don't and they get caught, they're out. Okay, I think that's what the regulator can do. I do think that, trying to talk here, the press is playing a very big part and a good part in bringing much of this out. I think that there's more information now about what is going on with these companies deep down. I'm a little mixed because at Uber there have been a ton of leaks, et cetera, about what's happened to Uber, and that's not necessarily a great way to run a company. But if I step back, the leaks and the Susan Fowler exposure, et cetera, it not only started a real cultural change that was painful for Uber, but incredibly positive. Right. The leaks, et cetera, led Uber to finally understand that it had to make the changes that it is making as a company to break from the past and go forward as a company that does the right thing. And the press played a very, very big part in it. Right. So I'm hoping that the press can be a big part of the solution going forward.
And I would just add, given, building on the point about the pace of change and how do you have regulation that keeps up with the pace of change, there's one very strong example that's in place right now, and that's the EU Code of Conduct. And setting a standard, making it clear what's expected, I very much agree, is what should be the rallying point, and we need individually and collectively to be investing to ensure that we're creating that kind of experience.
Right. Do you know, I think one thing that's interesting and I think is quite disappointing is that a lot of regulation seems to be calling for transparency. And you hear this a lot, right? You hear the way to build more trust is to be more transparent. But trust and transparency, they're not synonymous with one another. You've actually given up on trust if you need for things to be transparent. So I don't understand why that's the call, that we want these organizations to be transparent. What we need to believe is that they're trustworthy, that we trust their intentions. And to Mark's point, this isn't a brand attribute. It's not something that's managed by a communication team. It's embedded into the DNA of the entire organization. So every decision that's made, every design decision that's made, that we can trust those intentions. So I think the call should not be for more transparency. It's that we understand the intentions of these companies, and we believe that the intentions of these companies are aligned with ours as individuals and ours as society.
Can I ask you a separate question? Given the rise of cryptocurrency, and I know everybody, even last night, was talking about Bitcoin, that to me, in a way, is a direct correlation with the lack of trust that people have in large organizations, and yet a tremendous trust in technology. Anybody?
Well, that's what's so interesting is when you have an erosion of trust in traditional institutions, so in this sense, the banks or the financial institution, you create a trust vacuum. And interesting things rise up in a vacuum, interesting alternatives rise up in a vacuum. So we see that in the world of financial services with cryptocurrencies and the blockchain. And what's so interesting about the blockchain is that, people often say, oh, there's no trust. Well, yeah, you have to trust the idea and you have to trust the technology, you just don't have to trust the other user. And so I think that's, a lot of chaos and confusion in the world and a lot of pain can actually be explained by this trust vacuum. We also see it in politics. And so I think one of the questions for technology is it enabling us to place our trust in the right people in the right places, or is it encouraging us to give our trust away too easily?
The Trust Edelman Barometer, though, this year, I think had some fascinating data in it. I mean, the macro trends in particular, fascinating. But technology continues to be one of the most trusted industries. And when I think of some of the things that we're doing in Alphabet, take, for example, in life sciences, the ability to take machine learning and apply it to life sciences, where we can take disease management from reactive to proactive. We can have continuous monitoring of glucose to help you manage diabetes. We can deal with diseases like MS. We're taking technology and being able to improve diseases and life and health. So why do people still trust technology? Because technology continues to solve some of the most intractable issues. And I just think we want to make sure we're not conflating several different issues. Technology was rated really high. Search engines continue to do well. There are different parts of
from a political point of view, Andrew, I mean, the reason why governments, and we've had several examples in Europe in the last few weeks, months, of governments becoming more and more concerned about the rise of, let's say, the Seven Sisters or their equivalents. Why is that happening? That's not because regulators are being put under pressure to catch up with changes in technology. It's to do with populist movements and populism at the election box, at the vote with the voters, and concerns amongst the population, the electorate, about whether technology adds to the stock of jobs or depletes the stock of jobs. For example, Amazon launched its humanless store in Seattle 48 hours ago. No people in the store, nobody at the checkouts, nobody to welcome you into the store, nobody to help you. Just go in and you go out. Obviously, there's some technological features that have to be ironed out, but that raises all sorts of issues at the electorate level about whether it means jobs, the same number of jobs, or less jobs. And I think that's the key political issue. It's not to do with trust. Interestingly, our competitiveness issues, which covered survey, which this year, it's the third time we brought it out on countries, which this year covered political leaders and chief executives, rated Eric Schmidt and Mark Zuckerberg as the two most trusted corporate leaders. So the technology companies at a consumer level have done extremely well and will continue to do so. With Eric now stepping down at Google, we'll see whether Larry and Sergey step up into that box. But I think what's interesting is what the electorate's really concerned about is privacy issues and cybersecurity, and whether my information and data is safe, or secondly, whether my job is safe.
So Europe has been much more aggressive about regulation. President Trump is going to be here on Friday. Do you think that there's going to be a shift? Are we going to see a shift in the United States on this issue?
You're going to see you are seeing a shift, and you're going to see a greater shift. And I really think I touched on it earlier, and Martin just amplified it. But I think we should open that door farther, which is that as the Fourth Industrial Revolution gets more evolved, and as these technologies get more mature, then you are going to see more changes in the job structures, and there's going to be a shift in the technology. Dara's cars are not necessarily going to be driven by Uber drivers. They're going to be driven by Uber. So the computer. So that is a big change, a big shift in how trucks are going to be driven, or like Martin said, on the cashiers are going to, or police, or navies without sailors. There's a lot of changes coming very rapidly, and that construct in our society will be, for many people, they're going to wonder, well, can I trust this? Is this something that I can trust, what's happening? That AI took my job? Okay, and then how are we going to be retraining? How are we going to create the 5 million apprenticeships in the United States that we're going to need to be able to kind of help to transcend, all of this change that's going on? That's one of the things that I think about a lot, which is how are we going to create that next economy? Because all of that is changing, and trust will be at the center. Fourth Industrial Revolution, let's not, make any 2 cents about it. It's a crisis of trust. And this, we're kind of tasting it a little bit up here in the last year, couple years, what's kind of going on. But as we see more of this technology emerge, there's going to be a lot more gambits out there around trust.
I want to go to the audience. What were you going to say?
Just to Mark's point, I think that this issue of training and how do you train up the workers who are going to be displaced by automation. Listen, automation has happened a long time, right? No one said that Ford inventing kind of the assembly plant was a bad thing for the economy, right? This automation is going to bring prices down. Bringing prices down is going to make an array of goods available to a far, far greater percentage of the populace, including mobility for us, even though we're going to have drivers for a long, long time. So it is long-term a force for good, but the ability of companies to train the next generation of workers is a challenge that has been very, very difficult to break. And is going to be a big push for us.
By the way, real quick, and I'll go to Ruth. I read just yesterday you said autonomous vehicles actually may not be coming for another 10 years. Is that true?
Well, listen, I think that they are going to be coming, but if you even look at 10 years forward, if autonomous is 70 to 80% of our network, which I think is an optimistic assessment, we're still going to need to double the number of drivers out there. We're going to be hybrid for a long time, and we're going to be recruiting drivers to use our app for a long, long time to come.
Ruth.
I think there's a very important statistic that 90% of jobs today require some form of digital skills. Here in the EU, 50% of CEOs will say they cannot find people with those skills. It's higher in the UK, it's higher in some other parts of the world. There are jobs that cannot be filled. And so what we did, one of our really important pillars is digital skills training. We've now trained 3 million people in Europe, and we think it is very much the responsibility of all of us to be training people for the jobs of today and the jobs of the future. And very importantly, this is not asking people at the age of whatever to start to learn how to code. This is how do you use spreadsheets? How do you write emails? How do you do presentations? We're talking about basic skills, and throughout history, it's always been so easy to fear the jobs that might leave, but not understand how technology can be a tool to leverage you. But we do need to do that skills training, and it's right in front of us, and we are doing it.
Final question before we open it to the audience. It's everybody here, I think, is a parent on the stage, and you in your book you wrote an article about co-parenting with Alexa.
We're going to have to switch that.
And to Google Home. We'll change it to Google Home.
You might not want to switch it when I tell the story.
Well, no. But Rachel, I want to understand, and I'm curious, actually, since all of you are in the business, how you think about the relationship between technology and children and the next generation. But do tell the story, and then we'll open it up.
I have 2 young children. I have a daughter called Grace, who's a real character, and she loves clothes. She changes her clothes like 3-4 times before we go out. We have to allow an hour for Grace's fashion choices. No one gets to decide what Gracie gets to wear. And so I introduced Alexa to her. You'll be pleased, the first thing she asked me was she like Siri. She's 3.5. I said, she's kind of like Siri, but a bit smarter. Basically, over the course of 3 days, I watched her interaction. She did typical things like asked her about the weather. We heard a lot of music from Frozen. By day 2, she figured out she could order things. Now, of course, she didn't realize that Amazon was the very helpful corporate master, but it was day 3 where she stood in front of Alexa. She came downstairs. The first thing she did was say, "Good morning, Alexa. What should I do today?" And then she said, "What should I wear?" And what she didn't realize was that Alexa now doesn't just hear you, she sees you because there's a camera. And because Amazon are making a big plan to fashion, there's a style check feature where it gives you a rating. So it would rate one of her outfits 4.2, and it would give one of her other outfits maybe 5.2, and would suggest that maybe she needs a new pair of trainers, and would she like them shipped to her home or to her school within the next hour. And the point of writing this article was I then unplugged Alexa. But the point of writing it was, I think we're very quick to criticize children, but, how quickly she outsourced her trust to this algorithm, and how, as a parent, there's no way she can trust the intentions of that machine. There's no way she can understand the commercial intentions of that machine, and how this thing that drives us mad in our household about fashion choices that I have no control, that she gave that over to a machine within 3 days. And so that, I think, is, that's the line we cross in technology, is technology is not just doing things for us, it's now deciding things for us. And that's why the intentions of technology become really important.
Anybody else using technology interestingly
I have
before
a
we...
14-month-old who's addicted to her mobile phone already, which is scary stuff. Scary stuff.
Do you think, okay, real quick, do you think the technology companies have a responsibility, or do you as the parent have the responsibility?
It comes back to this media ownership versus technology companies. They do. I mean, you call Alexa and you say, what's the cheapest battery? What do you get? Duracell batteries. They have a 30% market share of batteries. Baby wipes, I'm an expert on baby wipes too. 30% market share. So...
Okay, Ruth is rolling her eyes. What do you say?
Well, my children are older, so I've gone through that whole life cycle, and I'm now at the 20. And I remember when we were growing up, kids would get plopped in front of the television for hours on end. I do think that we have a responsibility as parents to use tools where they're helpful, to open doors that help with education. We're empowering education. Let me give you one example. We now take into schools our virtual reality headsets. They're on cardboard, very inexpensive. And kids in any school, no matter how wealthy or poor, they can get on the world and go around and see museums all around the world. This is a tool that opens up their view of what is the world, what happened in history. They can see art they wouldn't otherwise be able to experience. It is enriching. Do I want to stick a kid in front of a TV in the 60s for 8 hours or in front of a mobile screen? No, but what the question is how do we use these so that they're actually operating leverage and we're using them to open doors, not to kind of as...
Dara, how's the 5-year-old?
5-year-old is totally in love with Google Home. And I would say this has been going on for a long time. So my wife and I said she doesn't want to put our boys in front of commercial TV anymore because they keep asking for the stuff. So they started with commercials many, many moons ago. They have an unusual sway over kids. And I think the point is, Ruth, you got to be responsible for your children. If it's not commercials, it'll be Alexa or Google Home. You have to be responsible for your children.
Okay, let's open it up. I went way too long, and I apologize. We have microphones going around the room. You're in the middle right here. We're going to go straight to you.
Thank you. Naomi Hernandez. I'm a global shaper from the San Salvador Hub. And I want to get a little bit more specific. What values do you think that make a company trustworthy? And if it is, what I have heard is that that you do what you say you do, but then what gives you a board of a company or a CEO of a company the authority to decide what is good or what is truth for the consumer, and especially when we have monopolies and when we don't have an option to decide for another offer?
Good question. Yeah, I think that this is really a very important question that, I think a lot of us are still trying to understand as we move into the fourth industrial revolution. What are the values that are going to be so important to us? I think I made the pitch for trust. I made the pitch for you better know what is important to you. If everything is important to you, nothing is important to you, tell me in order what your values are. I think that one of the big values that we've seen emerge in our company that's extremely important to our employees, our customers, our partners, and also in the communities that we operate in is equality. I think as we see the fourth industrial revolution emerge further, there's going to be this gambit between equality and inequality. That isn't just income equality. That's also LGBTQ equality. That's gender equality. That's pay equality. Do you pay men and women the same? Are you committed as the CEO or CFO of your company to pay everybody the same, equal pay for equal work? The World Economic Forum writes a very good report called the Gender Pay Report. It currently says it's going to take a significant amount of time, more than 100 years, before all the companies who are attending this conference will pay men and women the same. It doesn't create a lot of trust in the workforce when you say that you don't pay men and women the same. That seems like. So regardless of race, gender, race, what are you doing in diversity? Where are you going in terms of what your organization looks like? I come from San Francisco. We have a lot of diversity in our city, maybe more than any other city in the world. So we can see that. But that kind of concept of equality becomes much more forward.
Let me just, one other thing to add is connecting with your consumer in a real way, I think is incredibly important. For technology companies, it's easier to treat your customers as bits and bytes. But for us, our product folks go and sit down with their drivers at home and understand the responsibility that they have. And that connection with real people versus statistics and bits and bytes, I think is incredibly important as you navigate where you're going.
And we talk about it in the context of building for everyone, opening doors and creating opportunities for billions. But very much, as Mark said, come back to respect the user, respect the opportunity, and respect one another. And that's what drives a really mission-oriented approach.
We're going to try to sneak in as many as we can, so we're going to go very quickly.
Okay, Daniel Shin, Young Global Leaders. I don't think really regulation can solve every problem. And then, you guys own the humongous data, especially, private customer data. And then, in order to be more responsible beyond culture, what can it be to self-regulate your own service to the customer?
Well, for example, on the employment issue, it is public-private partnerships on apprenticeship, on training, on trying to migrate people from legacy models to new models.
Can we get a microphone right here?
Hi, my name is Wouter van Noort. I'm a journalist from Holland. Talking about regulation, one of the interesting things that are now gaining traction is ideas about data sharing, maybe even progressive data sharing. The larger a company gets, the more data it has to share with competitors or maybe even society. Would, and especially I'm looking at the representatives from Uber and Alphabet, would these companies be willing to share data if it's in the common good?
So I'll start. We are increasingly now looking to share data regarding traffic patterns, especially with the cities in which we operate. One of the most significant issues that cities are facing right now is congestion. So to the extent that we can partner up with cities, totally share our data in an open way with the cities to run through traffic patterns. Our agenda is electrification and also getting consumers to be comfortable with, and this goes to the trust issue, sharing a ride not only with a driver but with 2 or 3 other consumers so that you can reduce congestion. So we're taking a very kind of lean forward approach with regulators and with cities to share data and to help them reduce congestion. If it works, then that's something that we'll absolutely look to expand on a global basis.
The biggest single issue with our clients, with, let's say, the growth and development of Amazon, is their unwillingness to share any of their data. I mean, I think Google and Facebook have become much better in terms of sharing their data. There's still some issues. But Amazon, the big issue is, do I give my brand over to Amazon with Alexa controlling the interaction with the consumer and not in return get access to the data? Because Amazon ends up knowing more about what consumers' reactions are to brands and services than the brand or the service owner.
What about if, say, in China, the government are demanding the data from companies to develop a trust score on citizens? Would you hand over your data then?
Well, interestingly, in China, that's what they are going to do by 2020.
Right. Yeah.
Everybody will have a social index.
But no, but that's what I'm
Ruth, you want to take that on?
If they're comfortable, if the government said you've got to hand over your data on all your users because we're going to develop a trust score.
Well, currently the work we're doing in China is bringing companies outside and around the globe, and very pleased to be able to have that opportunity.
Okay. I think we have a question right back there.
Yeah, Don Tapscott, Blockchain Research Institute. Rather than sharing data, why don't we own it? I mean, we created it. And isn't the problem of data asymmetry is not just a power one. We create this data, others own it, so we can't use it to plan our lives. We can't monetize it, and our privacy is being undermined. So this is for Rachel or anybody. There are new projects underway to create a citizen identity that's portable and that's in a black box owned by citizens. And this identity collects your data for you so that you can manage it responsibly and use it to help benefit yourself. Regulation may be necessary, but it's insufficient. Ultimately, don't we need to get control of our data back?
Anybody think that's ever possible? Or is that genie out of the Toothpaste out of the tube, the genie out of the bottle.
It's happening. I mean, in countries like Estonia are starting to achieve that, and I think it is what we should be aiming for because it does give you control of your data. You decide who has permission to use it, whether it's in a public or private context, and you can see who's using it. So even if it's a hard goal, it should be the goal.
And at Google, you can go to see to both my activity and my account. You can control your information, and we give transparency and tools so users have that information.
Okay, I want to thank everybody here. I want to thank you guys for a great conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you for your questions. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.